Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. A 68-page report was released this week exposing abuse at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. The report covered sexual abuse, including grooming of minors and rape, as well as other abuse, spiritual manipulation, etc., both by staff connected to the International House of Prayer and by the founder, Mike Bickle. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit about who Mike Bickle is, what the International House of Prayer in Kansas City is. I'll kind of give you a brief introduction so you kind of know who's involved here. I'm going to talk about what prompted the investigation, how it was carried out, the takeaways from the investigation, and my personal thoughts on the matter as someone who covers stories of sexual abuse by clergy and other abuses within religious contexts. Got about 22 pages of notes. I've got a lot of feelings about this particular story, and I'm just going to kind of, shoot straight with what I think about it, but also try to give you as many facts as possible. But don't allow this video to be a replacement for seeking out the 68-page report on your own. It is publicly available. It's something you can check out, and you can read in great detail. And frankly, I think that the stories of these victims deserve to be read. There is some really powerful testimony that was shared in this report, and it's really well compiled, and I think it is essential reading for anybody who is passionate about these issues and wants to better understand, the topics of abuse in a religious context. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the story.
Stop and resist the devil. Quit telling Jesus how much you love his leadership. Keep doing that, but say, devil, go. Well, if he wants the devil to go, he'll tell him to go. He told you to tell the devil to go.
For more than 2 decades, Mike Bickle has been a towering figure in charismatic Christian circles. He's the founder of the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, as I've said, and built a global movement centered around this idea of 24/7 prayer and worship. The website explains, but on a crisp day in the fall of 1999, a small ragtag group of worshipers and intercessors gave themselves to a ridiculous, beautiful dream. Hour by hour, day by day, sometimes in an empty room, men and women, young and old, all races began to gather with a vision as simple in its essence as it was extraordinary in its scope, unceasing prayer and worship. To accomplish this, of course, they created the infamous IHOPKC prayer room, a sanctuary of corporate worship and intercession, staffed by prayer leaders, singers, musicians, and worship leaders who serve as missionaries. That prayer room exists, as they say, to partner in the Great Commission by advancing 24/7 prayer with worship and proclaiming the beauty of Jesus and his glorious return. They segment the 24-hour schedule into 12 worship-based prayer meetings, each lasting 2 hours. IHOPKC was a place of deep spiritual devotion, but for others, it was not a place of deep spiritual devotion. It was something far more sinister. It was a system where power went unchecked, allegations of abuse were buried, and survivors were pressured into silence. In October 2023, however, that silence started to break. On October 28, 2023, Mike Bickle made a phone call to someone who's labeled in the report only as interviewed witness number 17. According to IW17, Bickle stated, "I need to let you know about a little fire. Deborah has come forward." Deborah, in this instance, is a staff member at the International House of Prayer since 2012. She's the director of Forerunner Music Academy, which is based at IHOP, and she even co-authored a book with Mike Bickle way back in 2006 titled 7 Longings of the Human Heart. The report said that she was just an 18-year-old intern when Bickle started manipulating her, providing her with special treatment like an apartment, gifts, and money to create a sense of dependency and control. The little fire that Bickle was concerned about came to light shortly after in the call. Bickle disclosed that when he and Deborah Perkins were in Paris, he was, quote, praying hard with her, and he started kissing her, end quote. He also said that on another trip, he had booked a hotel for Deborah Perkins to stay in for a night, stating that Diane, his wife, was out of town. Bickle told independent witness number 17 that he had taken a shower, and when he got out, he had left the door open, and Deborah Perkins saw him completely naked. When IW17 questioned him about it, Bickle stated that he, quote, wasn't the most righteous man, end quote. A little while later, on December 12th, Bickle admitted to inappropriate behavior and moral failures that occurred over 20 years ago, after allegations of sexual misconduct had emerged. That's when Bickle decided to draft this statement. To my family and friends, with a very heavy heart, I want to express how terribly sorry I am that my past sins have led to so much pain, confusion, and division in the body of Christ in this hour. I'm confessing that 20 years ago, I sinned by engaging in inappropriate conversations and behavior. My acts of indiscretions were spontaneous, brief, and rare. They did not include some of the more intense sexual activities that some are suggesting, yet I saw my sins as grievous before a holy God. Since I take sin seriously, on those occasions I quickly and sincerely repented in a way that gave me assurance with God, and the Lord helped me to respond with a broken and contrite heart that was filled with godly sorrow. This draft statement that he created was revised before the final release, with Bickle changing his line that said, "They did not include some of the more intense sexual activities that some are suggesting," to a publicly released version that says, "I am not admitting to the more intense sexual activities that some are suggesting." Now, in the wake of this mediocre statement where he distances himself and does all the typical things you see in these messages, where it was 20 years ago, we're going to be super vague, I'm going to share as little detail as possible, he had no shortage of people that were going to support him. You had Misty Edwards, a well-known worship leader from IHOPKC, who stated on Facebook that she'd only experienced godly behavior with Bickle in her 25 years of working with him. Well-known author and conservative radio host Eric Metaxas called these false accusations and demonic, vile lies in a since-deleted tweet. Dr. Malachi O'Brien, former vice president of the Southern Baptist Convention, expressed, "I don't think God is done with Mike Bickle. The Lord is gracious and merciful." But although Bickle had some support and a powerful institution he'd built under his control, this statement ended up being the first crack in a dam that was about to burst. A growing number of survivors stepped forward with allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse at the hands of Mike Bickle, with some claims dated back as far as the 1970s, spanning decades of reported harm. Rather than taking immediate action, of course, IHOPKC leadership attempted to downplay the accusations, dismissing them as consensual or urging survivors to handle things internally through church discipline. But as more testimonies emerged, it became clear that this was bigger than one man's misconduct. This was systemic failure, one that required an independent investigation. That's where Firefly comes in. Firefly is an independent investigative organization that specializes in uncovering abuse in faith-based institutions. After IHOPKC leadership failed to properly address the allegations, they were engaged by an external organization to conduct a full-scale investigation. They signed an engagement agreement in September of 2024, officially launching a deep dive into decades of misconduct, cover-ups, and abuse at IHOPKC. Their process has been extensive and is still ongoing. So far, right now, if you're keeping track, Firefly has received over 224 reports through various channels. They conducted over 210 witness interviews, including 32 survivors who detailed experiences of sexual abuse, clergy abuse, and spiritual manipulation. And so far, they've reviewed more than 6,000 documents relating to this case. The allegations against Mike Bickle himself included inappropriate sexual behavior, coercion, and predatory actions toward women, some of whom were in deeply vulnerable positions, seeking guidance or mentorship with the IHOPKC community. I'll share a little bit about that in a second, but first, I'm going to share how the investigation was carried out. So, as of February 2025, 32 survivors have come forward with accounts of abuse spanning from the 1970s to the early 2000s. They conducted 210 witness interviews, like I mentioned, and those are witnesses who shared information anonymously unless they explicitly granted permission to disclose their identities. They independently came forward to provide accounts of systemic abuse, leadership failures, or specific incidents involving Mike Bickle or IHOPKC staff. A witness could include a bystander, colleagues, or individuals with indirect knowledge of events. Interviews were conducted via phone, Zoom, or in person during investigative trips to Kansas City, Colorado Springs, and Minneapolis. Those testimonies were then cross-referenced with documents like emails, letters, and survivor accounts to establish credibility. Here's what the research found. The report found several examples of grooming and abuse, including sexual abuse, rape, and clergy abuse. Now, for those of you listening to the show, you're familiar with what grooming is, but I'll define it as they define it in the article so there is no confusion. They define sexual grooming as a manipulative process where an abuser builds a relationship, trust, and emotional connection with the victim to exploit and abuse them, and it often involves a series of calculated steps to gain the victim's trust and isolate them from others. Grooming is described as a deliberate behavior used to manipulate another person over time, intending to erode their defenses and gain control over their actions. And I'll share a couple examples that they found in the report. Again, this is not a substitution for you doing your research on your own and digging deep into this story. Because what's disgusting about Mike's specific story is that there are individual cases of grooming, but he was constantly grooming large swaths of people within his organization and within his staff. In fact, in 1997, Bickle actually started a program called Friends of the Bridegroom, which consisted of a research team of a carefully selected group of, conveniently, 18 to 19-year-olds who are primarily female. Victims and witnesses stated that Bickle would meet privately with the group, laying his hands on each of them and praying for them. The group was required to fast and maintain celibacy, and many of the victims referred to this group as Bickle's team, Mystic's team, or Mike's team. Victims reported that Bickle often crossed inappropriate boundaries, frequently coming and going as he pleased in the apartment they were staying at, buying gifts, providing money. One of the interviewed survivors said that Bickle bred a secrecy between the group of girls, using prophetic words to address each girl specifically. This behavior contributed to an environment of unease and discomfort for the girls involved, raising concerns about their well-being and the program's true nature. Some of the interviews revealed that Bickle would often comment on young women's appearances in over-the-top and publicly embarrassing ways. There were numerous interactions where Bickle would make comments to women such as, "You know how much I love you, you're mine forever," and offering papa time with him. One witness said he would shower girls around him with gift cards, special movie nights, and food. Another example was Bickle assembling a scrapbook filled with clippings that said things like, "I love you much, blessings Mike, you're truly amazing, love Mike, hey good looking, how much does my own heart cost? And my dear one, I don't want you for what you can do for me, I want you and I want you for life, for as long as the Lord will give you to me, you're mine." These messages obviously highlight the inappropriate boundaries that Bickle constantly overstepped. He had tons of different things he did that were inappropriate, that were done in public, that people saw and went on for years. Witnesses recall seeing Bickle during church services and prayer meetings grab girls by their throats, kiss them on their faces, or ruffle their hair. It was super normalized. One survivor stated that Bickle would hug and kiss her on the forehead in the prayer room. She noted it was alarming to think that other leaders knew of Mike's issues and still allowed him to touch women in the prayer room without holding him accountable. Another one said that Bickle would touch her lower back, grab her from the back of the neck, and kiss her cheeks, forehead, and the top of the head. Another witness recounted multiple instances where Bickle would extend his hand in front of others and touch her face with his palm, often making remarks about her makeup. On one occasion, while seated at a table in the prayer room, Bickle approached her from behind, placed her in a chokehold, and smiled at her. She was startled and scared by the sudden and aggressive action. Another witness stated that he observed hundreds of secret communications between his wife and Bickle over 6 years. He noted that his wife would spend many hours alone with Bickle in his office and other locations, bringing him food and providing personal massages using essential oils on bare skin. In one of the most disturbing situations that's recorded in this report, Bickle's behavior escalated as he placed his hand on a woman's bare leg, ran it up her thigh, and made the inappropriate comment, "freshly shaved." There's lots of, you can read through the document and see people walked in on situations in Mike's office where women would have their hands inside of his pants. These things were so out in the open where, a lot of people were just choosing to turn a blind eye or were so bought in that they looked past some of the lighter forms of grooming that they saw and just said like, well, that's Mike, we don't have to worry about it. But there's two examples that are just absolutely horrific that are given in the document. Again, read them in detail in the report. But these involve the accounts of Terry Hartley and Tammy Woods. I mention these two specifically because they're some of the earliest cases of abuse that are mentioned in relation to Mike, and I think they're important for people to hear. Terry Hartley was someone who was abused in the mid-1970s by Mike. She was a 15-year-old student at Colonial Presbyterian Church in Kansas City. Mike Bickle happened to be the youth group intern at the same church. The grooming process began escalating to sexual assault when Bickle kissed Terry on the lips and fondled her breasts. In 1983, Bickle told Terry about a prophecy regarding the death of his wife, Diane. He claimed Diane's death would occur in an earthquake in St. Louis. Bickle implied that Diane's death would open a path for him and Terry to pursue a romantic relationship. Years later, Terry described feeling she had formed a soul tie with Bickle, a bond that persisted even into adulthood. The deep emotional bond that was formed from the time she was 15 years old, I should remind you, made it challenging for Terry to fully grasp the manipulative nature of Bickle's actions. Similarly, Tammy Woods, was 14 years old when she began babysitting for the Bickle family in 1988. Bickle was able to bond with her and her family and gain their trust, which allowed free access to her, which is a common tactic with sexual predators to gain the trust of everyone around. The early stages of grooming was Bickle sharing Proverbs 31:30 to her. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord shall be praised. He'd make her feel special with gifts, sharing Bible verses and food, and every time they were together, he became more flirtatious with her. As time went on, Bickle's behavior escalated into sexual assault and deviant sexual intercourse, as defined by the current Missouri statutes. After the abuse, Bickle's manipulation made her feel as though she had no one else to turn to. The gifts and attention, driving her to and from school and gymnastics, which initially seemed kind, became tools of control. Bickle expressed remorse, but then placed blame on Tammy Woods after their encounter. In doing this, Bickle was attempting to shift the responsibility and create confusion. What's horrifying about this is that starting in the 70s through the current day, there were so many situations that were identical to each other. During the investigation, Tammy Woods, Deborah Perkins, and a third survivor who were interviewed all said they observed Bickle in a state of undress with an erection, and each encounter appeared to be deliberate and targeted towards the girls. What the report reveals, though, is that not only is Bickle preying on women in the church, there were also other staff members and people connected to IHOPKC who were doing the exact same thing with their own respective victims. The report says that the investigation into IHOPKC has indeed uncovered troubling patterns. Beyond the allegations against Bickle, we uncovered numerous instances of sexual abuse and misconduct perpetrated by individuals associated with IHOPKC. It is crucial to emphasize these instances are not directly related to Bickle. These findings highlight a broader issue within the organization that requires immediate attention and action. Due to the extensive nature of the report and time constraints, they provided a summary of the various stories and responses for IHOPKC leadership. Throughout the investigation, they identified 16 accused staff members implicated in sexual misconduct claims, and many of the interviewed survivors who shared their stories chose not to include their experiences in the report due to fear of retribution from the abusers and/or IHOPKC. Firefly was permitted to share just 9 of the stories. And I'm going to say, as somebody who deals with listening to stories all the time, reading through this report felt like gut punch after gut punch after gut punch, because you're dealing with just cold, impartial facts here. You're dealing with just, here's what X did to X. Here's what this person did to this victim. And it is absolutely horrifying. I'll read a couple of sentences from this, but I encourage you to go read the entire report and get the full story. Accused staff member number 1 allegedly sexually assaulted and raped a 14-year-old female in the 1980s. This particular story actually led to IHOPKC retaining GRACE, an organization that stands for Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments, that conducted an independent investigation, but that report was never released to the public. The second scenario was that in 2010, an accused staff member allegedly sexually assaulted and raped a 16-year-old male. Another accused staff member had an inappropriate relationship with another intern. He would go to the apartment, give them gifts and food, and brought a massage table to provide massages to the interns. Multiple girls lived in a basement apartment owned by this man and his wife, and the bedroom door locks were removed to allow free access for this man. One intern at IHOPKC was physically and sexually assaulted by him in 2010 to 2011. During this period, she had been punched and thrown to the ground and sexually assaulted on multiple occasions. A different story says that someone was assaulted. Instead of receiving support, she was told that the term assault was too strong and was discouraged from going to the police or disclosing the incident to anyone. Another person said they were sexually assaulted by somebody and were told not to discuss it with anyone, and they said that this added to their trauma. Another person, a minor, joined IHOPKC as an intern. There were no specific protections in place for minors, and they were treated as adults, encouraged to fast and spend long hours in the prayer room. Shortly after his arrival, he was targeted and groomed by a male leader who exploited the prophetic to lure interns into sexual abuse. Yet another story was a woman who was sexually assaulted and raped by a staff member of the Night Watch program. She was told that the word rape was too strong a word to use for what happened. She eventually said that how the church handled the situation was, quote, far more traumatic than the rape itself. Yet another story says a former music school teacher and IHOPKC staff member led a group of students to tangibly comfort one another, using physical touch to show the heart of Jesus. In doing so, A single girl would sit with her head on this person's lap as he would stroke her hair, while his wife was in another room watching their children. Questioning this behavior was met with the accusation that any impure thoughts indicated that students weren't as redeemed as this predator. And the last one that they were allowed to share was a man who stated that his daughter was being stalked and harassed by one of the staff members. He reported the abuse to two executive leadership members, Ed Hackett and Isaac Bennett, who reported the incident to Bickle. Bickle, who was familiar with the staff member, stated that he backed him and no other action was needed. So you've heard all the horrors of this report. You've seen all the things that have happened over the years. And at the end of this report, as organizations like Firefly or Grace always do, they gave some conclusions and some implementation strategies that could be included. A lot of these are basic, like having training and education, background checks, having a clear child protection policy. But the thing is, you've got an organization that was founded with protections for a predator built into its DNA. The system is built by someone who was preying on people for almost 2 decades before starting IHOPKC in the first place. And this is something that is part of the very foundation that the entire ministry is built on. Whether that was the full intent of Mike Bickle, or whether it was partial intent, or whether it's something he just did and didn't even realize he did as he structured this organization, he created a perfect hunting ground. And I can't help but wonder if an organization that's built on that has a legacy of these abuses happening for decades, is worth saving. Now, personally, I don't have any hope that any of these things are actually going to be implemented, and I'll tell you why. One, I know that when Grace investigated one of those earlier stories that I mentioned, the story that was never allowed to be released publicly, I know with how Grace operates that they would have given them some of the exact same implementation strategies, as well as some other things to consider. And the leadership of IHOPKC definitely used that as toilet paper. In fact, if you ask me, I think you can crumple up all these recommendations, throw them away, as the leadership almost certainly already has, and allow the small flame of allegations that Bickle was so concerned about completely envelop this ministry and burn it to the ground. I know people are going to comment on this video and say that you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but I think in situations like this, it's clear that the bathwater is not only filthy, the baby died a long time ago and maybe was never even breathing. It's a bloated, disgusting mess of an organization that has been built on the very foundation of abuse of its leader, and it does not deserve to stay open. That's my opinion on the matter. I'm curious to hear what yours is. This is, again, a horrifying story. I did not expect all of this to drop today, and I will probably revert to sharing a little bit more about this at a future date, but that's my initial thoughts reading through the report. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on another episode.